On a rainy morning, a handwritten letter appears mysteriously on the CEO's desk. Inside, a photo of a little girl in a hospital bed and the words, "She's yours, daughter. Please don't let her die not knowing." Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The towering skyline of Manhattan glimmered under the early morning sun as Richard Lennox, CEO of the multi-billion-dollar Lennox Holdings, stepped out of his private elevator and into the hushed expanse of his executive office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered him a panoramic view of the city he had effectively conquered. Each skyscraper a testament to the deals he had brokered, the empires he had merged, and the influence he now wielded. Yet that morning, despite the usual routine of urgent emails and financial forecasts waiting on his desk, something else caught his attention. In the center of his otherwise immaculate workspace lay a single white envelope, one that looked out of place amid his meticulously arranged documents. His brow furrowed. Normally, messages and letters were screened by his assistant before they ever reached him in person. But this envelope had no formal sender, no recognizable mark, just his name typed in neat black letters across the front. To Richard Lennox, confidential. Intrigued and faintly unsettled, he slid a letter opener beneath the flap. The paper inside was ordinary, but its words landed like hammer blows on a fault line that ran deeper in him than any ledger or budget sheet ever could. "She's your daughter, and she's sick." The letter was brief, no more than a few sentences detailing that a girl named Charlotte lived in the outskirts of the city, battling an illness she might not overcome without help. There was no signature, just a final line. "Ask yourself what Evelyn would have wanted." The name Evelyn struck him harder than any mention of fatherhood or illness. 3 years ago, the woman he once loved more than his own ambitions had vanished from his life, leaving behind no explanations and only the ghost of their shared past. He had spent countless hours burying every memory of her under business expansions and relentless work, but a single mention of Evelyn's name brought it all rushing back. He sank into his high-backed leather chair, his mind a storm of questions. Was this true? Could he have a daughter somewhere in the city, one he never knew existed? His imagination raced. If Charlotte was indeed his child, why hadn't Evelyn told him? And who had delivered this letter? Outside the windows, Manhattan carried on with its unceasing bustle of cabs and corporate suits, but for Richard, time seemed to slow. For a moment, he considered dismissing the whole thing as an elaborate hoax. Powerful men like him were targets for extortion schemes. Yet that last line of the letter, "Ask yourself what Evelyn would have wanted," came across less like a threat and more like a plea. He stared at the typed words until his eyes blurred. In their final months together, Evelyn had grown distant, guarded. She had left him without so much as a forwarding address, and he'd convinced himself she was simply done with his ceaseless devotion to work. But what if there had been another reason? He buzzed his assistant, Sophia, who appeared in the doorway within seconds. She was efficient, sharp-witted, and had a calm presence that usually eased him into his day. But this time, Richard's tone was uncharacteristically unsteady as he handed her the letter. "Find out everything you can about this Charlotte. Addresses, medical records if possible, anything on file." Sophia's expression flickered with curiosity, but she nodded without prying. She knew better than to ask personal questions. Once she left, he rose from his chair and stood by the windows overlooking the financial district. Fragments of the past floated to the surface. Evelyn's gentle laugh, the warmth in her eyes, the way she'd teased him for working too late. Could she have kept a pregnancy hidden all that time? The notion sounded impossible, yet the letter insisted otherwise. He tried to recall the final argument he'd had with Evelyn. He remembered her frustration, the tension in her voice as she talked about things he couldn't understand back then, about needing more of him than just the corner of his schedule. She'd said she was tired of feeling like a footnote to his success. Had she walked away to protect a child? By mid-afternoon, Sophia returned. She carried a slim folder, and her careful expression suggested the contents would confirm at least part of the letter's claims. "Sir," she began softly, "I think you should see this. I located a record for a 10-year-old girl named Charlotte West. She's being treated at a clinic in Queens for a rare blood disorder. The bills are extensive, and from what I've gathered, they're largely unpaid. The mother, there's no clear record, but the clinic has next of kin information listing an Evelyn West." Sophia paused, choosing her words cautiously. "She matches the description of the Evelyn you mentioned a few years ago." Richard felt his heart pound against his ribs. 10 years old. Evelyn had left him 3 years prior, but that meant Charlotte would have existed for much longer than that. It nearly took his breath away, so the girl would have been around 7 when Evelyn walked out of his life. Trying to speak, he found his throat dry. "Does it say how serious her illness is?" Sophia nodded, her voice solemn. "Serious enough to need specialized care. The clinic's records indicate that she's been in and out of the hospital for the last few months. They're trying a new treatment plan, but it's expensive and not guaranteed." He sank back into his chair. Charlotte. The name echoed in his mind, stirring something paternal he had never realized he possessed. He had spent years crafting an unshakable image, the unflinching executive, the man who thrived on discipline, the star of business magazines. But none of that power seemed relevant now if a little girl, his little girl, was suffering. "Send a payment to the clinic, enough to clear any outstanding debts," he said, his voice hoarse. "I don't care how much it costs. Just do it quietly." There was no hesitation in Sophia's acknowledgement. "And—" Richard took a breath, pressing his fingertips to his temples. "Arrange a car. I want to see her." "Are you sure you want to go alone?" Sophia asked gently, aware this was no ordinary business matter. Richard nodded. "Yes, schedule it for tomorrow morning." That night, he hardly slept. He paced his penthouse apartment, the moonlight casting shadows across gleaming marble floors. Every echo of his footstep reminded him of just how empty his life truly was. The success, the status, none of it had offered genuine comfort for the hole in his heart since Evelyn left. But now, a bigger question haunted him. If Charlotte was his child, how could Evelyn have kept her a secret for so long? He remembered the old arguments they'd had about wanting kids. He had always insisted they wait, that the timing needed to be perfect, that his company was still scaling up. She'd told him once that life didn't wait for perfect conditions, but he'd brushed it off, believing he still had time. Now he might have run out of time altogether. The next morning, Richard found himself stepping out of a sleek black town car in front of the modest clinic in Queens. The contrast to his usual life was stark. There were no tinted glass skyscrapers, no sea of suits, just a small building with peeling paint and a handful of patients milling about near the entrance. He took a steadying breath and walked inside, his footsteps echoing on worn linoleum floors. At reception, an overworked nurse behind the desk glanced up and frowned slightly at the sight of his impeccable suit. "I'm looking for Charlotte West," he said, trying to steady his voice. The nurse consulted her computer, nodded, and gestured down the hallway. "Room 214, Mr. Lennox. Are you family?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I hope to be." She seemed puzzled by his answer, but she didn't press. He followed the corridor, each step making his pulse hammer louder. Outside room 214, he paused, collecting himself. Part of him feared what he might see, but he also understood that if Charlotte truly was his daughter, he owed her far more than a moment's hesitation. When he finally stepped inside, his heart lurched. The girl in the bed looked far too small for her 10 years. An IV drip attached to her arm, monitors quietly beeping in the background. She had wispy dark hair and pale skin, eyes closed in restless sleep. Though the lines of her face were delicate, he noticed a faint echo of his own features in the curve of her cheek, the shape of her brow. It was as if his entire world tilted on its axis in that instant. Every priority he had ever declared as paramount suddenly overshadowed by the fragile sight before him. A nurse quietly stepped around him to check the monitor, and Charlotte stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze landed on Richard. Confusion flickered across her face, but there was no fear, just the mild surprise of a child who wasn't expecting a stranger in her room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He felt overwhelmed by how to begin, by the possibility that this could all be true, that this girl, battling an illness in a small Queens clinic, was his. "Hi," he said, voice trembling slightly. I'm Richard." She tried to sit up. "Are you a doctor? I've never seen you here before." He took a few steps closer, feeling an unfamiliar pressure behind his eyes, a sting of tears he hadn't allowed in years. "No. Not a doctor, just someone who got a letter and wanted to help." Charlotte blinked, curiosity mixing with her exhaustion. "A letter?" Richard nodded, carefully taking a seat by the bed. "Yes, it said you might need help, and that your mom was..." He paused, unable to bring Evelyn's name to his lips without a rush of emotion. "I knew her once." A sadness passed across Charlotte's face. "My mom, she's gone now." Her voice was so small, and Richard realized that Charlotte had likely faced more pain in her few years than he ever had in all his cutthroat business battles. He reached out slowly, placing his hand near hers without quite touching, as if asking permission to be there. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "about your mom and about everything, but I'm here now." "Why?" she whispered, seeming genuinely puzzled. "Why do you want to help me?" He swallowed, hearing the unspoken question beneath her words. Where were you before? He couldn't say the real answer, that he had no idea she existed. Somehow he already couldn't bear to cause her more grief. So he just said quietly, "Because sometimes we find out the most important things too late, and I don't want to be too late for you." Charlotte looked at him for a moment longer before a faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Then, exhausted by the mere act of conversation, she leaned back against her pillows, her eyes drifting shut again. Even in that brief exchange, Richard sensed the weight of her illness pressing down on her. He had no idea what her road to recovery would look like, only that he had to be part of it now. He stood, suddenly filled with a resolve he'd never felt in any merger or hostile takeover. This was about far more than money or success. This was about saving the life of a child who might just be his daughter, about stepping into a role he'd spent his entire adult life avoiding. Whatever battles lay ahead, he realized in that moment that he was ready to fight them. Somewhere Evelyn's memory hovered between them, pushing him forward even as the final words of that anonymous letter echoed in his mind. "She's your daughter, and she's sick." He would do everything in his power to ensure she never had to face this illness alone again. Richard left the clinic that day feeling uncharacteristically unsteady, as though the ground had shifted beneath him in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. For years he had prided himself on being able to predict the ebbs and flows of the market, to anticipate boardroom coups, to steer his business empire with razor-sharp acuity. Yet now, staring out the tinted window of his town car as it wove through the busy streets, he felt powerless. His thoughts kept returning to Charlotte's face, pale, determined, and somehow hopeful despite her circumstances. He had sat by her bedside for only a short while, But in that fleeting span, the girl had awakened something deeper in him than any pursuit of wealth or power ever had. He arrived back at his penthouse, an expanse of polished marble and towering glass that overlooked the city he once believed was his to command. Softer shadows crept across the living room now, an odd hush settling over the usual hum of city life below. He set his coat aside and moved toward the window, resting a hand against the cool pane. He could see thousands of lights flickering in the distance. Normally the view would comfort him, it signified how far he'd come. But tonight, all he felt was the weight of responsibility. His phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. He pulled it from his pocket, half expecting it to be Sophia with another update, but instead he saw the name of an old acquaintance, Graham Pierce, an attorney he had consulted many times on various corporate matters. For a moment, he hesitated. Ever since he read the letter, he'd understood there would be legal implications if Charlotte was indeed his daughter. Evelyn's name was nowhere on official guardianship records, and the thought of dealing with paternal rights made his chest tighten. Still, ignoring the call wouldn't help. He answered in a calm, practiced tone, bracing himself for whatever Graham might say. "Richard," Graham greeted politely, "I heard some interesting rumors today about certain medical payments you authorized." In the background, the faint shuffle of papers suggested he was leafing through documents as he spoke. "I won't pry, but you and I both know that secrecy's not always guaranteed when large sums move quickly. Is there anything I need to be aware of legally?" Richard gripped the phone a little tighter. The secrecy was intended. He'd wanted no press coverage about any philanthropic gestures, and certainly no sensational story that the city's most elusive bachelor might have a child. But even hush-hush transactions left traces. "I'm handling a personal matter," he said evenly. "I'll let you know if it becomes more complicated." Graham was silent for a moment, then his voice softened. "Take care, Richard. And if this is something beyond business, you know you can trust me." The line went dead. For a brief second, Richard allowed himself to feel gratitude. Graham wasn't just a corporate lawyer. He was one of the few people in Richard's circle who understood that money couldn't solve every problem. If he'd picked up on the tension, chances were others would soon as well, especially in a city like this, where secrets never stayed buried. His sleep that night was restless. He dreamed of corridors lined with hospital rooms, each one containing a figure he couldn't see clearly. He kept opening doors, searching for Charlotte, but whenever he stepped inside, he found only empty beds and monitors flickering with unreadable data. In the dream, he felt Evelyn's presence just beyond his peripheral vision, close enough to hear her whisper his name, but never near enough to see her face. When morning finally came, he awoke with a start, heart pounding in the pre-dawn stillness. Sophia had arranged for a midday meeting at Lennox Holdings, but before attending any calls or addressing stock issues, Richard placed one critical phone call. He dialed the clinic asking to speak with Charlotte's primary physician. A soft-spoken woman introduced herself as Dr. Ames, sounding slightly flustered to be on the line with the titan of business himself. Still, she remained professional, summarizing Charlotte's condition in precise clinical terms. The words bone marrow compatibility, transfusions, and advanced treatment protocols all coalesced into a grim tapestry. When Dr. Ames mentioned the possibility of needing a family member's bone marrow to increase the odds of survival, Richard's breath caught. The entire conversation underscored just how little time he might have if Charlotte's condition worsened. He hung up, mind racing. He needed to confirm paternity, a test that would be straightforward enough if Charlotte agreed, but that implied a conversation far more delicate, explaining to a sick child that the man who sat at her bedside could be her father, even though he had never been around before. Swallowing hard, he decided he would approach it directly. He couldn't let Charlotte's health deteriorate simply because he hesitated to reveal the truth. That afternoon, he returned to the clinic. The staff, now accustomed to his presence, ushered him wordlessly to Charlotte's room. This time she was awake, propped up on pillows, flipping through a thin magazine. She looked up, a flicker of a smile crossing her face, though fatigue rimmed her eyes. Seeing that small warmth made his chest tighten. He thought of how he used to live entirely for data and outcomes, how nothing outside of business had ever truly penetrated his carefully constructed walls. Now, here she was, a child who might tear those walls down with just one trusting glance. She set the magazine aside. "You came back," she said, half question, half observation. "You don't have to keep visiting. I'm used to being, alone." Her voice carried no bitterness, only a quiet resignation that felt far too mature for her age. "I want to be here," Richard replied softly, stepping closer. He took the visitor's chair beside her bed, remembering how foreign it felt the first time he sat there. Now, he couldn't imagine leaving her side for long. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "Charlotte, there's something important I need to ask you about, and it might sound strange, but it matters for your health." She tilted her head, curiosity knitting her brow. "Is this about those tests Dr. Ames keeps talking about?" He nodded. "Yes, she told me you might need a donor, and sometimes the best match is a close relative. I believe I might be your father." The words came out uncertain, as though even in speaking them he was still grappling with the enormity of it. "I didn't know about you before," he added, his throat tightening. "If I had, I would have been here." For a moment, Charlotte said nothing. Her gaze flickered over his features as if searching for something, maybe the honesty in his expression, or perhaps glimpses of herself in the shape of his face. At last she whispered, "Mom never talked about you. She never said I had a dad who'd want to help." Richard's heart twisted. Things ended before I realized. We had problems, and she left. I won't pretend to know why she never told me about you. But I'm here now, and if it helps you get better, I'll do whatever I can." He swallowed, struggling with the surge of emotion. "I'm not expecting you to trust me right away, but please consider doing a simple test so we know for sure. If I match, then maybe I can help." The girl's eyes welled with something more than tears. It was a mix of hope and fear. She pressed her lips together, then nodded slowly. "I'll do it." In that fragile moment, Richard wished for Evelyn's presence to help guide them. If only she hadn't taken those secrets with her. The letter had offered him nothing but a single clue. Now he faced the hardest task of all, guiding Charlotte to some sense of security and maybe a future without the mother she loved. When he left the room, he nearly collided with Dr. Ames, who appeared relieved to see him. They made arrangements for a quick paternal test, agreeing it was the logical next step. As they spoke, a heavy truth settled in Richard's mind. If he truly was Charlotte's father, the stakes weren't simply financial or logistical. Her life might very well depend on him, in ways he had never imagined fatherhood could manifest. Outside, the day had darkened with an early autumn rain, droplets trailing down the clinic's windows. His driver opened an umbrella, but Richard barely noticed the wet chill. Instead, he felt a strange exhilaration that clashed with his deeper worries. He was stepping into unknown territory, no longer the all-powerful CEO who dictated terms. Here he was a man trying to do right by a child. He made a silent promise to himself that no matter what the DNA test revealed, he would not abandon Charlotte. Whether or not they shared blood, he owed her every chance at a healthy, dignified life. Returning to Lennox Holdings, he found his usual routine, meetings, figures, strategic calls, teetering on the verge of insignificance. Yet he couldn't simply ignore them. The board expected him to finalize a new acquisition deal by the end of the quarter. His executive team needed direction on a major product launch. Clients demanded an audience with the top man himself, and the world expected him to remain unflappable. But how could he? In a quiet moment between meetings, he retreated to his private office and stared at a faded photo he'd once kept hidden in a drawer. Evelyn stood beside him at a corporate gala, beaming in a sleek black dress. He remembered how she always balanced the intensity of his work with her own quiet but radiant passion for life. Where had things truly gone wrong? He'd assumed she left because she'd grown tired of being second to his ambitions. Now he questioned whether the pregnancy had terrified her, especially if she believed he would see a child as an inconvenience. He pressed a thumb against the image of her face, wishing he could ask her why she hadn't come to him, wishing he could apologize for all the moments he hadn't paid attention. But regrets wouldn't change the past. All he could do was move forward. And moving forward meant embracing the possibility that Charlotte might be his in name and in biology, and that her survival might hinge on his willingness to become something he'd never planned to be: a father. That night, in the darkness of his penthouse, the city lights spread out below him like scattered diamonds. He recalled Charlotte's question, "Why do you want to help me?" and the tremor in her voice. She had likely asked herself that countless times about everyone who came in and out of her life. Exhaling a ragged breath, he let his gaze wander across that shimmering urban sprawl. He was Richard Lennox, known for ruthless efficiency and unwavering composure. But confronted with the raw vulnerability of a little girl, he realized that none of the accolades or assets he'd amassed could prepare him for the simple, irrevocable act of caring for someone more deeply than he cared for himself. Richard woke the following morning with a sense of anticipation that bordered on dread. The paternal test results still weren't in, and already he felt each hour drag, torn between cautious optimism and guilt. Deciding that a direct approach was best, he arranged to meet Dr. Ames at the clinic in person. If the results confirmed what his gut increasingly told him, he would have to confront not only the medical reality of Charlotte's condition, but also the legal and emotional complexities of becoming a father overnight. Hailing his driver, he left the glass tower of Lennox Holdings and traveled again to Queens, feeling an odd relief at exchanging the corporate hush for the noise of everyday people leading everyday lives. Part of him wondered if, in another life, he might have found more contentment away from his perpetual pursuit of ambition. When he arrived, the small lobby was bustling with visitors and nurses navigating the narrow corridors. A few recognized him from his previous visits, and he responded to their polite nods with a subdued greeting, acutely aware that everyone likely speculated why this powerful businessman had taken an interest in a young patient. He offered no explanations. Outside Charlotte's room, Dr. Ames was reviewing a chart. At Richard's approach, she offered a reassuring, if somewhat worn, smile. The lines on her face suggested a physician who had seen too many children struggle without adequate resources. He respected her dedication. If the world had more people like her, perhaps hospitals wouldn't need outside donations just to offer basic care. He forced a polite greeting past the dryness in his mouth, anxious to learn if the results had finally arrived. She led him aside, voice low. "We have the paternity test results. They arrived just this morning." Her eyes flicked to Charlotte's closed door. "I know this must be difficult for you, but I feel obliged to say, regardless of what the results indicate, that child needs support. She needs stability, maybe even more than just financial backing." Richard nodded, throat tight, signaling for her to continue. "You're a confirmed match," Dr. Ames told him gently. "The DNA results indicate a 99.9% probability that Charlotte is, in fact, your biological daughter." Richard swallowed, a cascade of emotions colliding in his chest. Relief and disbelief mingled with a self-reproach so heavy it nearly winded him. He didn't deserve her trust after so many absent years, But none of that changed the fact that she was his, and she was in peril. "What happens next?" he asked, his voice catching. Dr. Ames cast another glance at the door, as though considering how much to divulge. "It means you have the right to make medical decisions on Charlotte's behalf, should you choose to formally accept that responsibility. And with your involvement, we can expedite certain specialized tests, or even prepare for more aggressive treatments if needed. But she'll need you to be present emotionally too, Mr. Lennox. A lot of children in her situation lose hope, and that can be as detrimental as any physical setback." The weight of her words pressed on him, illuminating an entirely new realm of fatherhood he had never contemplated. It wasn't simply about signing forms or clearing medical bills. It was about showing up. With a nod he hoped appeared confident, he braced himself to share the news with Charlotte personally. Inside the room, Charlotte was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling with a faraway gaze that made her seem older than her 10 years. He cleared his throat gently, and she turned her head, offering him a tired smile. "Hey," she said, voice soft. He approached, trying to draw upon some reservoir of calm he wasn't sure he had. "I spoke with Dr. Ames," he began. "The tests, they confirmed that we're—" He paused, the words still feeling foreign. "That I'm your father." A hush settled, broken only by the beep of monitors tracking her vitals. Charlotte's eyes flickered with an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. Relief, maybe, mixed with confusion. "Okay," she said quietly. It wasn't an accusation or a joyous outcry. It was more like acceptance of something she had guessed might be true all along. "I know you must have questions," he continued, pulling a chair close to her bedside. "I wish I had answers for all of them. But the most important thing right now is your health. Dr. Ames told me there may be more advanced treatments we can explore. And if you need anything, my marrow, my blood, I want you to have it, whatever it takes to get you better." She gave a slight nod, eyes drifting to her hands. "Mom always said she didn't want to bother anyone," Charlotte murmured, voice trembling faintly. "But sometimes I felt like maybe there was someone out there who was supposed to care." Her gaze lifted. "Are you that person?" The vulnerability in her face tore down any last remnants of Richard's composure. "Yes," he managed, fighting the lump in his throat. "I am, and I'm not going anywhere." Charlotte squeezed her eyes shut, as if bracing against a storm of emotions. When she opened them again, she seemed calmer. I'm sorry for all of this," she whispered. Richard's chest ached. "No, don't ever apologize," he said firmly. "You're a child. You deserve care no matter what happened between your mother and me." He hesitated before adding, "I wish I had known sooner. I wish I'd had a chance to know you from the start." The shadow of a smile touched Charlotte's lips, though it faded quickly under the weight of her exhaustion. "Me too," she said. Then she yawned and sank deeper into the pillows, the conversation clearly sapping her energy. "Can you stay a bit?" Richard's throat tightened again. He nodded. "Of course. I'll be right here." So he remained, quiet and watchful, as she drifted back to a fitful sleep. Over the following days, a new pattern emerged in Richard's life, one that revolved around hospital visits, conversations with nurses, and calls to specialists for second opinions. While he delegated some corporate responsibilities to his senior executives, he refused to abandon his role entirely, aware that stepping down even temporarily would spark rumors. Yet each time he walked into that clinic, he felt an odd sense of relief, as if drawn by a purpose that transcended the daily deals and deadlines. Charlotte, though frequently fatigued, began to ask small questions about him, what his childhood was like, whether he liked music, and if he ever wished he could do something other than business. He answered as honestly as he could, sometimes uneasy in the realization of how little real life he'd let himself experience beyond boardrooms and corporate obligations. One afternoon, after a lengthy meeting with an oncology specialist, Richard stepped outside the clinic to find the autumn sky cloaked in gray. A gust of wind carried dried leaves across the sidewalk. He noticed a woman watching him from across the street, her expression unreadable beneath a hooded coat. When their eyes met, she turned away, vanishing into the crowd. Though he dismissed it as a trick of nerves, he couldn't entirely shake the sense of being observed. He wondered if perhaps the letter writer was still keeping tabs on him, or if some reporter had latched onto rumors about Lennox Holdings' CEO visiting a children's ward. The notion made him uneasy. Charlotte's illness was not a spectacle. He vowed to guard her privacy fiercely, even if it meant resorting to legal pressure against any invasive press. That evening, he met with Graham Pierce, an attorney he trusted. Upon confirming Charlotte's paternity, Graham advised him to formalize custody. Richard agreed, determined to protect her. He realized that no empire mattered if he lost his daughter. Richard had never envisioned fatherhood in any form, let alone as a sudden reality tied to hospital corridors and life-altering decisions. Yet the more he visited Charlotte, the more he felt himself settling into a new rhythm of responsibility that both terrified and grounded him. The days blurred with progress reports from Dr. Ames, updates from specialists who evaluated Charlotte's condition, and the hush of late afternoons spent beside her bed, reading quietly or watching her sleep when exhaustion overtook her. She was fragile, frailer than any child should be, and each glance at the IV pole or the line of pill bottles reminded him how close she stood to peril. One overcast morning, Charlotte was taken for a round of tests, leaving Richard momentarily unoccupied in the bustling corridor. He used the time to slip into a small waiting area, calling Graham Pierce to discuss the custody papers. Even from a distance, he could sense how enormous a step this was. Not merely a legal arrangement, but a complete transformation of his life. He watched the swirl of parents, doctors, and volunteers pass by. Each carried a story, a fear, a hope. Strangely enough, he found himself identifying with them more than with the lofty world of CEOs and multi-million-dollar signings. He realized that beneath his carefully sculpted composure, he was like any anxious father, bracing for good news or bad. Graham's calm, methodical voice spilled through the phone. "I've prepared an initial filing. Charlotte's official guardianship can transfer immediately if you wish, though we'd need a signed statement confirming her mother's passing and a DNA verification." Richard nodded, mentally noting that the test results were on record. "Also," Graham added, "there's the question of a will. Did Evelyn leave anything specifying custody?" Richard exhaled. "If she did, I don't have it. She vanished from my life, and I never heard about a will or estate settlement." The lawyer paused. "Then we'll proceed with the assumption that you are the sole living parent who can take guardianship. Once you sign, we can set a hearing date. It should be swift, given the urgency of her medical needs." Hanging up, Richard realized that within days he could be Charlotte's legal guardian, her father in every sense recognized by law and society. The notion sent a thrill of both wonder and responsibility coursing through him. He returned to Charlotte's room to find her subdued but composed, fiddling with a plastic bracelet on her wrist. Her eyes lit up faintly when she saw him. "How were the tests?" he asked, sitting in the familiar chair at her bedside. She shrugged. "Same as always. Needles and more needles. But the nurse was nice, so it wasn't too bad." Richard nodded, wishing for any magic words that might lessen the weight she carried, but none came. Instead, he picked up a small, worn book from her side table. "You like adventure stories?" he asked, reading the title, a classic about a shipwreck and survival. She managed a faint grin. "Mom gave it to me years ago. She always said reading let you travel, even if you were stuck in one place." Richard's throat constricted with the reminder of Evelyn, but he forced a gentle smile. She wasn't wrong. They spent the next hour talking about the characters, sharing an easy conversation that made him forget the medical machinery crowding the room. He noticed how quickly Charlotte's breath would hitch if she spoke too long, and how color faded from her cheeks when she shifted positions. Still, she was bright, engaged, and more curious about his life than she was about her own uncertain future. She asked him about his work, whether he traveled the world, and if he had any pets. He admitted that he had none, that he'd never been home enough to care for a dog or cat. "Maybe someday," she suggested, "if I get better, we could adopt one." For a moment, Richard forgot how to speak. The notion of a shared future, complete with a pet, felt like an impossible gift. "I'd like that," he finally said, voice nearly catching. Later, as day dimmed into twilight, the overhead lights in the ward gave everything a hushed glow. Dr. Ames stopped by with updates explaining that the next few weeks would be crucial. They had a new course of medication to try, but success was never guaranteed. As she spoke, Richard observed Charlotte's expression. She met the doctor's eyes with a resigned bravery that astonished him. When Dr. Ames finished, Charlotte nodded as if absorbing each detail. Then, with a soft good night, the physician left. Richard remained, pushing aside a tendril of guilt that he hadn't sought Charlotte out until the letter arrived. If only he'd known sooner, if only he'd tried to track Evelyn. No, he had to focus on the present. As Charlotte dozed off, Richard slipped into the hallway. Checking his messages, he noticed a missed call from Sophia. He dialed back quickly. Her voice buzzed across the line, crisp but urgent. "Mr. Lennox, a few reporters have been calling the main office asking about rumors that you're financing treatments for a child in Queens. They're hinting at a deeper story." Tension rippled through him. He'd known it was only a matter of time before the press circled. In a city that fed on gossip about the rich and powerful, any deviation from routine aroused speculation. "Release no statements yet," he said, "but arrange a discreet meeting with our PR manager. We'll handle it carefully." Hanging up, he clenched his jaw. The last thing Charlotte needed was a media spectacle painting her as some secret billionaire's child. He vowed to shield her from that circus. Despite the swirling concerns, he felt a strange calm within the ward's quiet corners. He decided to stay overnight in the cramped waiting lounge, a decision he'd once have considered beneath him. But as he tried to make himself comfortable on a stiff chair, he realized he wanted to be close if Charlotte woke feeling ill or afraid. The warmth of that desire to protect her proved more satisfying than any suite he'd ever booked in luxury hotels across the globe. Morning brought a new wave of hospital chaos, nurses changing shifts, doctors making rounds, the persistent beep of machines. Richard had barely dozed when a nurse gently nudged him awake. "Charlotte's asking for you," she said. He rose, body stiff, mind foggy from restless sleep. In the room, Charlotte looked paler than usual, her forehead damp with sweat. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached. "Did you stay?" she whispered. He nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, I wanted to be here." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you. Sometimes at night it's hard." The unspoken fear hung in the air. He understood. Nighttime was when the shadows crept in, when every beep of the monitor could feel like a countdown. He helped the nurse adjust Charlotte's pillows. She coughed weakly, and he brushed a stray hair from her forehead. A wave of protectiveness nearly overwhelmed him. He imagined the moment she might finally leave the hospital, stepping into sunshine with renewed strength. But that day was still distant, shadowed by uncertainties. He reminded himself they had to take it one step at a time. Later that afternoon, he found himself in Dr. Ames's office, going over the complicated next steps for Charlotte's treatment. The conversation turned to finances, exact costs, specialized procedures, possible clinical trials. Richard assured her money wasn't an obstacle, though inside he felt anger at a system where a child's health could hinge on wealth. Dr. Ames nodded gratefully. Having your backing can open doors we often find locked, but Charlotte's emotional support is just as critical. Richard took her meaning. No matter how many specialists or experimental regimens he funded, Charlotte's chances improved if she felt less alone. Leaving Dr. Ames, he spotted the woman in the hooded coat again, loitering by a vending machine. Anxiety spiked. Could she be the letter writer or some reporter using stealth tactics? He took a step toward her, intending to confront her gently, but a sudden rush of hospital staff wheeling a patient cut off his path. When the hall cleared, she was gone. A prickle of unease formed in his stomach. If someone was observing him, were they also watching Charlotte? Determined to find answers, he decided to ask the clinic's security for any recent surveillance footage of the corridors. That evening, he headed home briefly to shower and switch suits. His penthouse felt eerily empty, the silence pressing on him in a way it never had before. For years, he'd cherished that quiet, equating solitude with success. Now it felt hollow. He caught sight of his reflection in the mirror, a man whose stoic features belied the swirl of doubt inside. He allowed himself a moment to recall Evelyn with painful clarity. How her laugh once echoed against those marble floors. How she'd teased him for leaving takeout boxes on the counter when deadlines consumed him. Anger flared briefly. Why had she vanished, leaving him ignorant of his own child's existence? But the anger dissolved into sadness. He'd never get the answers he needed from her. When he returned to the hospital that night, Charlotte was awake, nibbling on a piece of toast. She gave him a fragile grin. "I was just telling the nurse about the time Mom and I lived in a tiny apartment near the river. We'd pretend the radiator hiss was the ocean." Her voice quivered with nostalgia, and Richard ached at the realization he hadn't been there to witness any of those small joys. "She tried her best," Charlotte added, "but she always seemed scared of something. I never knew what." He settled in a chair, heart heavy with unsaid apologies. "Evelyn had a complicated life," he offered, "and sometimes when people are scared, they make decisions that might not make sense to anyone else." Charlotte nodded, the corners of her eyes crinkling in confusion. I wish she hadn't kept you a secret. Maybe if you'd known, things would be different now." "Maybe," her voice caught, and she looked away, tears threatening. Richard rested a hand on hers. "We can't change the past, but we have right now. We'll do our best with it. I promise." They fell into a comfortable silence until Charlotte dozed off. He remained at her side, the beep of monitors forming an odd lullaby. As he watched her breathing slow, he felt a renewed determination. The custody paperwork would finalize soon, but his role would mean more than a signature. He had to become a father in every sense, offering love and security. The weight of that responsibility might have once felt daunting, but as he gazed at Charlotte's sleeping face, he felt ready. Tomorrow would bring more tests, more obstacles, perhaps even more media attention. But tonight, he would stay there, bridging the years of absence with whatever comfort he could give. He pressed his hand gently over hers, hoping she somehow sensed his presence in the dreamscape of her mind. Then, with eyes drifting toward the moonlit window, he allowed himself to wonder about the days ahead. Imagine, however tentatively, a future in which Charlotte grew healthy enough to leave this hospital behind and maybe even join him in the sprawling penthouse that no longer felt like home unless she was in it. Early the next morning, Richard slipped out of Charlotte's hospital room while she was still dozing in fitful sleep. The pinkish tint of sunrise streamed through the windows, illuminating the corridor with a gentle glow that clashed with the lingering fluorescent lights overhead. Last night's promise to stay by her side pulled at him, but pressing tasks needed his attention if he was to protect her future. Despite the ache in his chest, he left quietly, determined to return as soon as he could. First on his list, confirming details with Graham Pierce about formal custody. If it were up to him, he would move Charlotte into his penthouse immediately, away from the stale antiseptic corridors. But Dr. Ames insisted she remain under close observation until her new treatment regimen stabilized. Even so, having official custody would let him manage every aspect of her care. No more waiting on distant relatives who didn't exist, or old bureaucratic protocols that had drifted since Evelyn's death. Richard wanted the power to say yes to treatments, to bring in specialists, to do anything necessary. For the first time in his life, he was using his influence not to clinch a corporate merger, but to save a life that mattered more than any deal. He arrived at his office in Lennox Holdings just as staff trickled in, clutching coffee cups. The usual hush that followed his presence settled in, but his mind was too consumed by worry to notice. Sophia awaited him with a folder of urgent items, her gaze flicking briefly to his tired eyes. She said nothing about his appearance, though her concern was evident. Instead, she handed him a schedule for the day, plus a discreet note. Press inquiries mounting, PR strategy needed. He scanned the words, jaw tightening. News outlets had latched onto rumors he was bankrolling a sick child's treatment. He could almost picture the headlines if they learned the truth. Elusive magnate's secret daughter. He imagined Charlotte's photo plastered on screens and tabloid covers, her illness turned into fodder for public speculation. The thought made him recoil. "Arrange a private meeting with our PR team," he told Sophia, voice clipped. "We need a statement that explains my charitable work at the hospital without divulging details about Charlotte's identity." Sophia nodded, hurrying off. He appreciated how quickly she adapted to his unspoken priority. Protecting Charlotte's privacy was non-negotiable. Moments later, he dialed Graham. "I'm ready to sign the paperwork," he began, not bothering with greetings. "Let's file for custody this week." A soft exhale carried across the line. "Of course," Graham said. "We can expedite it under medical necessity. Do you want to incorporate any stipulations regarding press gag orders or additional protective measures?" Richard's mind churned. "Yes, everything that ensures her anonymity is preserved. She's too vulnerable, Graham. I won't see her hounded by paparazzi." The attorney agreed, adding that he would liaise with the court discreetly. Once they ended the call, Richard stared at the phone, grappling with a sudden wave of relief and fear. He was signing on to be a father legally. An inescapable line was about to be crossed. He pushed through several morning briefings, though the board members' chatter about profit margins and expansions felt strangely distant. All his years in business had taught him to read a room, calibrate his presence, and dominate negotiations. Now that mastery felt hollow. Numbers and projections slid off him, replaced by an incessant awareness of Charlotte's condition. Only when the meeting ended did he allow himself a moment to breathe, alone in his glass-walled office overlooking Manhattan. Around noon, Sophia signaled him that the PR manager had arrived. The woman stepped in, wearing a polished suit, armed with a portfolio of strategies. "Good afternoon, Mr. Lennox," she began, voice crisp. "We've got chatter from at least 3 major outlets. They're asking pointed questions about your involvement with a pediatric ward in Queens." She listed possible approaches: deflect with a standard philanthropic angle, release an official statement with minimal detail, or present a carefully staged interview to quell rumors. He shook his head. "No interviews. My charitable contributions remain private. That's the narrative. I've chosen to support children's health initiatives. No child's name, no specifics." The manager nodded. "Understood. We'll craft a statement focusing on your broader philanthropic endeavors. We'll emphasize confidentiality regarding patient identities." As she spoke, He felt an odd gratitude for the shield money and power could provide. Yet it also saddened him that such a shield was even necessary. He thanked her curtly, dismissing her before checking his watch. He had promised Charlotte he'd return today, and he refused to break that promise. By mid-afternoon, he was on his way back to the clinic. The city rolled past in a blur of taxicabs and pedestrians. He remembered, with a pang, how Evelyn once teased him about living in the back seat of a car, always in transit, never pausing to savor the present. If she could see him now, dedicating his free hours to hospital visits, would she approve? Or would she feel vindicated that, without her, he had spent years in lonely, single-minded ambition? The clinic was busier than ever, but Dr. Ames had cleared a small private lounge near Charlotte's room for him. He entered quietly, glimpsing Charlotte through the half-open door. She was sitting up, flipping through a coloring book. Though she still looked pale, she seemed more alert, her eyes focusing on the page rather than drifting wearily. Hope flickered in him. If she was having a good day, maybe the new medication regimen was helping. Maybe her body was rallying. He knocked softly and stepped inside. She brightened at the sight of him. "I got bored," she said, holding up the coloring book with a sheepish grin. They only had pictures of cats and flowers, though. I was hoping for something cooler, like dragons. He chuckled, settling onto the chair. "I'll see what I can do. Maybe I can get you something with knights and battles." She nodded enthusiastically, then grew more serious. "Any news about, the official stuff?" He recognized the tension in her voice. She knew there were complexities around who would look after her. He reached over and placed a gentle hand on hers. "I'm finalizing paperwork. It means I can make decisions for you, and once you're ready, you'll come home with me. No more hospital, or at least not all the time." A spark lit her eyes. "Really? But what if the doctors say I still need to stay?" He nodded in understanding. "We'll cross that bridge. If you need to remain here, that's what we'll do. But eventually, I want you to have your own room, your own space, everything you deserve." She looked away, blinking back tears. "Mom and I moved around so much," she said, voice trembling. "I never really had a room I could decorate. It was always half-packed boxes in case we needed to leave again." That remark ignited a fresh wave of questions. From whom or what had Evelyn been running? He'd gleaned no clues from the letter. And the mysterious woman he kept spotting in the corridors, did she hold more answers? Anger surfaced, mingling with sorrow. Charlotte should never have lived such a transient life. He cleared his throat. "We'll fix that," he said softly. "No more running." Silence lingered, charged with unspoken regrets on both their parts. He wondered if Charlotte blamed him for not searching harder, or for not somehow intuiting her existence. Yet she showed no resentment, only relief that he was here now. That evening, Dr. Ames stopped by to discuss the newest test results. The medication seemed to slow the progression of Charlotte's condition, though a definitive cure remained elusive. "We're looking into specialized therapies," the doctor said. "Potentially a bone marrow transplant if we can find a compatible donor. You're a partial match, but we may need an even better one." Richard's chest tightened. "I'll do anything. Expand the search globally, pay for registry drives, whatever it takes." Dr. Ames nodded, gratitude evident. "It helps a lot that you're stepping in. Charlotte's proven resilient, but she needs all the support we can muster." Later, after Charlotte dozed off, he lingered by her bedside, letting the hum of machines lull his frantic thoughts. The hush was interrupted by a soft tapping at the door. A nurse peered inside. "Mr. Lennox, security says there's someone downstairs asking for you. They don't have an appointment, but they mentioned your name." Suspicion flared. Could it be a journalist who'd tracked him, or the hooded figure who'd slipped from sight? With a sigh, he He rose, giving Charlotte one last glance to confirm she was asleep before following the nurse. At the security desk, he saw the same hooded coat. The woman was petite, hair tucked beneath a knitted cap. She stiffened when she noticed him, as if ready to bolt. But he caught her gaze, moving forward with quiet determination. "Excuse me," he said, voice low. "Have you been following me?" She shifted, refusing to meet his eyes. "You have no idea, do you?" Her tone carried a wary tremor. "Look, I'm not the enemy. I'm trying to make sure she's safe." Richard's pulse drummed. "How do you know Charlotte?" The woman's expression flickered with pain. "I knew Evelyn, and She hesitated. "I'm the one who sent the letter." His breath caught, a dozen questions surging. "Why didn't you come to me in person?" Her gaze hardened. "Because Evelyn made me promise never to involve you. But after she died, I saw how desperate Charlotte's situation was. She needed help, and it was clear you were her last hope. I wrote the letter because I couldn't watch her fade away." A mixture of relief and anger tangled in him. "So you've known all along? You've been watching me from the shadows?" She nodded, shoulders tense. "I stayed away because I wasn't sure if you'd accept her or turn her away. But you came through." He lowered his voice to keep from causing a scene. "If you truly care, step out of the shadows. Tell me what else I need to know." Her gaze dropped, a swirl of guilt crossing her features. Evelyn's reasons for running, they weren't simple. She had secrets she never shared, even with me. "But I can tell you everything I do know." Richard inhaled, glancing at the security guard who hovered uncertainly nearby. "We can't talk here. Meet me in that waiting area on the second floor," he said, tone almost commanding. She bit her lip, then nodded. As she headed up the stairs, he stayed back a moment, feeling the ground shift beneath him once again. If this woman truly possessed the missing pieces of Evelyn's life, she might explain not only Charlotte's lonely upbringing, but also the fear that overshadowed them both. He rubbed a hand across his jaw, steeling himself for another revelation that could upend everything. But for Charlotte's sake, he needed the truth. Glancing at the elevator doors, he took a fortifying breath and followed. He thought of Charlotte upstairs, that faint spark in her eyes as she spoke of a future with a decorated bedroom and maybe a cat or dog. She deserved stability, not layers of hidden truths. Whatever secrets Evelyn left behind, Richard would face them. He owed Charlotte that much, and more. Richard found the hooded woman waiting in a drab corner of the second-floor lounge, a small space dominated by muted blue chairs and vending machines humming against the wall. She was perched on the edge of one seat, arms folded, as if prepared to flee at any sudden movement. When he approached, her eyes flickered with a mix of regret and resolve. He noticed how she twisted the hem of her coat repeatedly, a nervous tic that reminded him of Charlotte fidgeting with her blankets whenever fear crept in. "All right," he said, keeping his voice low, aware that hospital staff might wander by at any moment. "You wrote the letter. You say you knew Evelyn. So, let's hear it. Who are you, and what do you know?" She took a breath and stood, her posture still defensive. "My name is Marina," she began. "Evelyn and I worked together for a while in a catering company upstate. We weren't the best of friends, but we got close enough that she trusted me with some things. And one of those things was Charlotte." Richard forced himself to remain patient. "You said Evelyn was frightened of something or someone. What was it?" Marina's gaze dropped momentarily. "She talked about you from time to time, you know. Not by name, but she mentioned an old boyfriend she'd left behind. I guessed you were wealthy, but I never realized how much until after she passed. She made me promise never to reveal Charlotte's father, no matter what. Said she didn't want to ruin your life." But then Charlotte got sicker, and there was no way to afford the treatments. A shadow crossed Marina's features. Evelyn died with that guilt, believing she had no right to ask you for help. Richard felt a surge of conflicting emotions: anger at Evelyn for not trusting him, sadness over the lonely corners of her life, and guilt that maybe he had once given her a reason to fear his reaction. "Why was she so sure I wouldn't care?" he demanded, forcing down the crack in his voice. "All she had to do was tell me." Marina let out a shaky sigh. "Evelyn never spoke badly about you, but she felt you lived in a different world. She said she saw how your ambition shaped everything, and she worried a child would be disruptive to you. She convinced herself you'd resent her for it." He sank onto one of the chairs, pressing a hand to his temple. The idea that Evelyn had quietly borne all this alone cut deep. So she decided to vanish instead, and Charlotte paid the price. He grimaced, remembering Charlotte's stories of moving from place to place, of never having a real home. "Why did you keep an eye on me after you mailed the letter?" Marina bit her lip. "Because I wasn't entirely certain you'd come through. Evelyn left instructions that if anything happened to her, I was to watch over Charlotte. But with my finances and her condition..." Her voice trailed off before she continued. "I got desperate. So I did the only thing that made sense. I told you. Then I watched to see if you showed up, if you truly cared. And you did. I've seen you at her bedside every day." Richard recalled spotting her in the corridors, how his suspicions had been tinged with fear for Charlotte's safety. Now he understood. "So you were making sure I wasn't just a monster with money," he said bitterly. "Fine. Now you know I'm serious about helping her. Is there anything else I need to know?" Marina hesitated, glancing at the hallway. "Not about money, but there's something else Evelyn mentioned. She sometimes said she wasn't just afraid of your reaction, she was afraid of her past catching up. She never gave me details, but I gathered she owed debts. Possibly someone was threatening her. I'm not certain. All I know is that she left a few towns in a hurry. One time I saw letters from a loan shark demanding repayment. She burned them before I could read more." A knot formed in his stomach. Evelyn, tormented by mounting threats while raising Charlotte alone. He thought back to every extra hour he'd spent in the office, every chance he might have had to notice her distress and didn't. "So that's why she was always running," he said softly, his anger fading into a deep ache. "She believed she had no one to turn to." Marina nodded, her tone apologetic. "I'm sorry if this hurts you. She also worried that if you came to her rescue, you'd do it on your terms, like a business solution, not a partnership. She thought she'd just be another obligation, and she refused to be someone's burden." He stared at the scuffed linoleum floor. It was such a grim irony that the woman he'd loved believed he'd see her and their child as obstacles. He wondered what fleeting signs he might have missed. Perhaps if he'd shown even a fraction of the devotion he now felt for Charlotte, Evelyn might have trusted him. But regrets changed nothing. At length, he looked up. "Thank you for telling me." Then a wary curiosity pinched his expression. "What do you want from me now? Are you expecting some kind of compensation?" Marina shook her head vehemently. "I don't want your money. I only want to make sure Charlotte is okay. I know she's in the right hands now. Seeing you here day after day was enough proof. I'll keep her secret, keep your secret too. Paparazzi can be ruthless, and the last thing Charlotte needs is a spotlight." Relief washed over him, tempered by caution. "If you truly care about her well-being, you'll contact me if anything seems off, or if you remember something more specific about who might still be looking for Evelyn, or for Charlotte." She nodded. "I will. And if it helps, I still have some of Evelyn's old belongings in a storage unit. Letters, photos, maybe diaries. I never went through them, but you should. He felt a sting of longing. I'd like that, he said, voice hushed. Whenever you can bring them to me, I'll look them over. Maybe I'll learn something important. For a moment they stood in a fragile truce, sharing the same regret, that a woman they both cared for had lived and died in fear. At last, Marina murmured a subdued goodbye and hurried away, slipping back into anonymity. He wondered if he'd see her again or if she'd keep her distance now that she believed her promise to Evelyn was honored. Heading back upstairs to Charlotte's room, he found her awake, flipping through television channels with mild disinterest. She brightened when he walked in. "Where'd you go?" she asked. "Everything okay?" Richard forced a reassuring smile as he sat beside her bed. "Just handling a few matters. How are you feeling? Any pain?" She shrugged, pressing the TV remote to her lap. "A little tired, but better than yesterday. Dr. Ames said I might get more scans soon." He nodded. "They're just keeping track. I talked with Graham, my lawyer, today," he added gently. "We're finalizing the paperwork so I can become your legal guardian. That way, nobody can question who's responsible for you." A flicker of relief passed over her features. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. "I was scared, thinking maybe they'd move me to another foster home if I got out of here." His jaw tightened at the thought of her tossed back into the system like an unclaimed package. "I won't let that happen," he promised, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Once you're well enough, I'm taking you home." She exhaled, visibly relieved. Then her lips twitched in a shy half-smile. "Does your home have, like, a view of the city?" He laughed softly, picturing the sprawling windows of his penthouse. "Yes, it's way up high, and you can see all the skyscrapers lit up at night, almost like stars in reverse." She closed her eyes briefly, imagining it. Mom always wanted to see the city lights from a tall building. I guess she never got the chance. His heart clenched. He pictured Evelyn leaning over a balcony, marveling at the city she'd once inhabited only from the ground. Perhaps if life had turned differently, they'd have shared those nights together. A nurse entered, interrupting his thoughts with a polite question about Charlotte's vitals. She needed to check the monitors and adjust the IV drip. Richard gave them space, stepping aside to the window. Outside, the day had brightened, late morning sun shining over the busy streets. In here, time felt suspended, measured by medication schedules and test results. He realized he was growing accustomed to the beep of machines and the hushed footsteps of hospital staff, as though he'd found a second office in this place, yet he still longed for the day Charlotte could walk out under her own strength. Minutes later, the nurse departed and Charlotte beckoned him back to her side. "Are you coming tomorrow too?" she asked hesitantly, as if the question might push him away. "Because I know you have your job and everything." He sat back down, meeting her gaze. "I'll be here," he said. "No matter what my schedule is, I'll find a way. You're my top priority now." Warmth touched her eyes, and she fiddled with the blanket, perhaps unsure how to express her gratitude. But he didn't need the words. The relaxation in her shoulders said enough. The rest of the day passed in small moments. They watched a children's movie on the TV, something whimsical with talking animals. He found himself half laughing at the silly dialogue, all the while catching glimpses of Charlotte's quiet amusement. Once or twice, a glimmer of genuine delight surfaced in her eyes, washing away the fatigue etched in her face. He realized how starved she must have been for ordinary joys. As dusk approached, Richard stood to stretch. "I'll go grab us some dinner," he offered. "Hospital meals can't compare to a decent sandwich." She nodded, and he slipped out. On the way, he imagined picking up something sweet for her. Maybe vanilla pudding or a small slice of cake. For so long, he'd hurried through life, devouring power lunches without savoring them. Now, every small gesture toward Charlotte felt like a revelation, a chance to nurture someone other than his own ambitions. At the tiny cafe near the lobby, he saw staffers in scrubs line up for coffee, their expressions weary yet determined. He respected them deeply. They fought every day for children like Charlotte, while he'd been ensconced in a glass tower chasing deals. An odd pang of humility coursed through him. Yes, he had money, enough to shift the odds in Charlotte's favor. But these people dealt in compassion and perseverance. He collected 2 sandwiches and a small container of custard, deciding it would serve as dessert. Then, as he made his way back upstairs, a thought struck him. He had no idea how to care for a child in normal circumstances: playtime, school, routine checkups. Yet he felt an irrepressible resolve to learn, to adapt. When he returned, Charlotte was curled on her side, eyes half closed but not quite asleep. A faint smile graced her lips when she spotted the food. "Custard," she said, a note of pleasure in her voice. He handed her the container, touched by how a simple treat could bring her joy. Together they ate in a companionable hush, the overhead lights dimming as night settled over the ward. He noticed that her exhaustion came in waves, her eyelids drooping as she tried to finish the meal. Eventually she surrendered, drifting off with half her sandwich untouched. Richard watched her for a moment, heart heavy with the knowledge that each day might bring new hurdles. Yet inside that heaviness glowed a new purpose, a father's fierce devotion he'd never known he was capable of. He leaned in, brushed a stray strand of hair from her brow, and promised himself, and Evelyn's memory, that he would not fail this fragile life. Whatever shadows Evelyn had fled, whatever secrets lingered, he would see Charlotte through them all. And maybe in doing so, he'd salvage whatever part of himself had once believed in love, beyond the confines of corporate success. The next morning began under a veil of thick gray clouds. Richard woke early from a shallow sleep on a hospital cot Dr. Ames had arranged for him in an unused storage alcove. He checked his phone, messages from Sophia, from Graham, from the board, all awaiting decisions he could scarcely bring himself to care about. Only Charlotte's lab results had the power to stir a real reaction in him now. Still, he forced himself to step away for a moment, instructing the nurses to call his cell if she needed him. It had been over a week since he first received that mysterious letter, and every day since had drawn him deeper into fatherhood than he'd ever imagined possible. He drove to the courthouse where Graham awaited with custody papers already prepared. The building's imposing stone columns and echoing corridors reminded him uncomfortably of his earliest days as a novice businessman, fumbling through legal complexities and wanting to appear in total control. But now, the stakes were higher than any corporate merger. In a private room adjoining one of the judge's chambers, Richard and Graham reviewed the final documents. A typed statement verified Charlotte's paternity, along with Dr. Ames's urgent recommendation that her care be supervised by a legal guardian who could support her. It felt surreal to see so many official words describing something so intimate. A father stepping up for a daughter he hadn't known. "All it needs is your signature," Graham said softly, sliding a sleek pen across the table. "The judge has already signaled approval. Given Charlotte's medical circumstances, this is merely a formality." Richard inhaled, pressed the pen to paper, and signed with steady strokes. He tried not to think about how a single scrawl of ink could mean the difference between life and death for Charlotte, how it might allow him to save her in ways no one else could. Graham gathered the papers, offering Richard a small nod. "Congratulations. Legally, she's now under your guardianship." Outside, the clouds had grown heavier, an autumn drizzle beginning to patter on the courthouse steps. Richard lingered under the overhang, phone in hand, debating whether to call Charlotte with the news. Then he reminded himself that she was only 10, Explanations of formal custody might not register the same way it did for him. Better to simply be there day after day, proving that the promise went beyond a line on a legal form. He returned to the hospital, anxious to share a warm greeting instead of complicated legal jargon. When he reached Charlotte's room, she was sitting up, wrapped in a soft blanket, eyes closed as if lost in thought. A middle-aged volunteer was there, reading softly from a storybook. The moment Charlotte heard his footsteps, she opened her eyes and glanced over. "Hi," she murmured, a shy smile tilting her lips. "You were gone a while." Richard nodded. "Had some paperwork to sign, something that means I can make sure you're safe with me." She didn't ask further, only reached out a hand. He took it gently, feeling a quiet thrill that she no longer hesitated to seek comfort in him. "Any new tests?" he asked, glancing at the machines. She shook her head. "Not yet. Dr. Ames said maybe tomorrow." The volunteer offered them a kind nod, quietly packing up the storybook and slipping out. Alone with Charlotte, Richard studied her face, noticing a bit more color in her cheeks than on previous days. Maybe the medication was helping, or perhaps her spirit had lifted. Either way, the sight made him hopeful. They spent the afternoon together, drifting between small conversations and quiet reading. She was finishing the classic survival tale he'd bought after discovering her love of adventure stories. He offered to read a few pages aloud, and though the words felt awkward in his mouth, his voice more accustomed to boardroom negotiations, Charlotte smiled at every inflection. By the time he finished the chapter, she looked both tired and content. During a lull, he stepped into the hallway to call Dr. Ames for an update. The doctor assured him they were examining potential donors for a future transplant. "We're testing national registries," she said. "I'll keep you posted. For now, we monitor her response to these treatments. She's hanging in there." Relief washed over him. Even slight stability felt like a victory. Just as he hung up, he spotted Marina's slight form at the far end of the corridor. She hovered near the vending machine, gazed down, as if reluctant to interrupt. He walked over, tension flaring momentarily until she met his eyes with a subdued nod. "I didn't want to intrude," she murmured, glancing at Charlotte's door. "But I've brought some of Evelyn's belongings." She gestured to a small cardboard box at her feet. "Letters, photos. I hope it helps you understand her choices." Richard's pulse quickened. "Thank you." He hoisted the box, feeling its modest weight. "I'm not sure what I'll find in here, but maybe it'll fill in the blanks." Marina's eyes flickered with a mix of sorrow and relief. "I truly hope so. Charlotte deserves to know who her mother was, beyond the fear." Then she offered a hint of a smile. "You're doing well with her. Evelyn would be glad." Before he could respond, she turned and left as quietly as she'd come. That night, after Charlotte had fallen asleep, he carried the box to the small waiting room and sat down under the buzz of fluorescent lights. With cautious hands, he removed the tape and sorted through the contents. Faded Polaroids of Evelyn as a teenager, a high school ID card, some random receipts from road trips. He paused at a photo showing Evelyn in a sundress, smiling beneath a tree in summer bloom. Her features practically glowed with life, and he could almost hear her laughter. A pang of longing cut through him. Why hadn't she let him see more of that world? Beneath the photos lay envelopes stuffed with handwritten letters. Some were addressed to no one in particular. He glanced at the first page, scanning her neat script. Within moments, he realized they were more like journal entries, scribbled confessions. His throat tightened as he read, "I'm so tired of running. I can't let them find me. Richard could fix it all in a heartbeat, but then what? Would he see me as weak, as a liability? I can't bear the thought." He inhaled sharply. So she had considered telling him about her troubles. The next line read, "Charlotte deserves a chance. I can't drag her into more danger. If I vanish, At least she won't be pulled into those debts or the people who want to collect. His jaw clenched. Debts. Threats. She'd feared some looming figure, a nebulous threat that might harm both of them. He flipped to another letter, eyes skimming. If anything ever happens to me, I hope Charlotte finds Richard. He might resent me, but he wouldn't resent her. She's innocent. And if I'm gone, that means I failed. But maybe he can succeed where I couldn't. Emotion welled in his chest, a mix of anger and sorrow so intense he had to set the pages down. Evelyn had wanted him to find Charlotte eventually. She'd believed he could be the one to protect her when she no longer could, and yet she'd also been paralyzed by the fear that he'd see them as hindrances. Shaken, he rummaged deeper, discovering a small notebook with more personal reflections. The final entry's date was only a few weeks before Evelyn's death. I'm losing energy. Charlotte's so strong, but I can't keep up. I wish I had the courage to call Richard. But how do I explain everything? The money I borrowed, the interest piling up, the men who follow me. It's too dangerous now. If he steps in, they'll find a way to exploit him. Maybe it's best if I disappear entirely, protect them both. His mind spun. Men who follow me. Loan sharks. Possibly criminals. Could they still be out there, unaware that Evelyn had passed, or that Charlotte existed? If they discovered he had stepped in, would they try to extort him? His initial fear that Charlotte could be in danger gained clarity now. It wasn't just the press or curious bystanders. Real threats might lurk in the shadows, especially if they believed Evelyn's debt was outstanding. He carefully packed the letters and photos, vowing to hire an investigator to identify who might still be after Evelyn's unpaid loans. He would not let those ghosts endanger Charlotte. She had enough to fight with her illness without a criminal element looming. Steadying himself, he returned to her room, setting the box aside where she couldn't see it. For now, it was too heavy a truth to place on a child's shoulders. In the dim glow of the bedside lamp, Charlotte stirred, opening her eyes just enough to see him. Couldn't sleep? She mumbled. He forced a small smile and sat at her side. I was reading some old notes your mom left, he said carefully. She wanted you to be safe. He didn't elaborate. It would be too much detail. Charlotte yawned, eyes drifting shut again. That sounds like her, she whispered, always worried. After a few seconds, her breathing slowed. He watched her, heart aching with the weight of Evelyn's words. There was regret in them, but also a silent plea. She had never truly shut him out from malice. She'd been trapped by fear and bad circumstances. Now he was the one dealing with the aftermath, caught between her secrets and the small life in front of him that desperately needed his love and courage. Kneeling gently, he brushed Charlotte's hair back. The flickering fluorescent light cast shadows across her peaceful face. His phone vibrated softly, startling him. He stepped into the corridor to answer. Sophia's voice crackled. Sir, I hate to bother you so late, but we've heard rumors that a tabloid has picked up the story of your hospital visits. They're insinuating you have an illegitimate child. They might print something soon unless we respond. He closed his eyes, a spike of anger flaring. His personal life, Charlotte's fragile condition, twisted into a sensational headline. Issue a blanket denial, he said coldly, but do not mention Charlotte by name. And see if our legal department can threaten a lawsuit if they print unverified information. Sophia hesitated. Understood. I'll do what I can. He ended the call and stared at the silent corridor. One crisis after another seemed determined to overshadow Charlotte's chance at healing. But he would fight them all. Evelyn's memory still guided him, as did Charlotte's timid hope. He thought of the day Charlotte might step outside these walls, healthy enough to see the city from his penthouse. No tabloids, no threats, just the two of them in a future built on something more meaningful than the ruthless ambition he once revered. Re-entering the room, he gently resumed his vigil by Charlotte's bed. The swirl of unknown dangers and haunting regrets churned in his mind, but her soft, steady breathing anchored him. He was a father now, whether he'd planned it or not. And fatherhood, he realized, meant learning to fight battles he never saw coming, forging a path that went beyond any measure of corporate success. He would not falter. For Charlotte's sake, he had to be the man Evelyn once hoped he could be. Richard hardly left Charlotte's side for the next 2 days, determined to shield her from the swirl of rumors building beyond the hospital walls. The staff did their best to run interference, keeping curious onlookers and any stray reporters at bay, but he sensed the mounting tension. Now that he had legal custody, word would spread faster. After all, a billionaire CEO filing for guardianship of a sick child was news too irresistible for the tabloids to ignore. Despite the stress, Charlotte seemed stronger. Small signs of improvement surfaced: less fatigue in the mornings, a bit more color in her cheeks, an increased appetite that let her finish half a meal instead of just a few bites. The transformation wasn't dramatic, and Dr. Ames warned him not to expect miracles. Still, every modest gain felt like a blessing, a hint that maybe her treatment was finally taking hold. On a crisp afternoon, he found her sitting up, fiddling with a thin, beaded bracelet one of the volunteers had given her. She turned when he entered, giving him a relieved smile. "I dreamed about your penthouse," she confessed shyly. "I've never been that high above the city before." He set down a bag of fresh fruit he had picked up from the market. "I was thinking," he said, his tone tentative, "once you're stable enough to leave the hospital, even if you still need outpatient care, maybe I could fix up a room for you. Paint it whatever color you like. Buy that bookshelf you wanted for your stories." Her face lit with cautious delight. "I've never really decorated anything. Mom and I used old wallpaper scraps once, but we had to leave so quickly." She paused, blinking away the ghosts of that memory. "If Dr. Ames says it's okay, then yeah, I'd love that." The very idea of preparing a space for her at home both thrilled and unnerved him. He'd spent a lifetime building a fortress of solitude in that penthouse, stocking it with everything except warmth. Yet now he imagined plush rugs and pillows, maybe some whimsical prints on the wall, anything to make Charlotte feel welcome. That thought alone made him realize how profoundly his priorities had shifted. Later that day, he spoke with Dr. Ames in the hallway. She confirmed that Charlotte could be released in a few weeks, provided the next battery of tests showed continued improvement. "She'll still need regular checkups," the doctor warned, "plus potential round-the-clock nursing if her immune system weakens. But if you have the means to manage it, a familiar environment might benefit her emotional outlook." Richard nodded, determined. "I'll make it work," he said, "whatever she needs." With that, he started texting Sophia, instructing her to contact a top-tier private nursing agency. He wanted professionals ready for any complications, plus he needed to ensure security was discreetly in place. After reading Evelyn's letters, he felt certain there were people who might still pose a danger to Charlotte, even if they had no clue where she was yet. That same evening, as dusk settled in smoky layers over the city, Richard headed downstairs to the hospital's security office. He had requested a review of any unfamiliar faces or suspicious loitering in the past few days. The security chief, a no-nonsense man in his 50s, guided him through camera footage. A handful of reporters had tried to slip in, but staff had turned them away. Still, nothing indicated a direct threat. No sign of ominous figures stalking the hallways, no loan shark lurking in the shadows. Richard felt a surge of relief, though he remained vigilant. Evelyn's writings weighed heavily on his mind. Men following her, demands for repayment, and the possibility that someone might look for Charlotte if they believed her mother's debts were outstanding. Tucking the security records under his arm, he returned upstairs. He found Charlotte awake, her expression lit with curiosity as she flicked through television channels. When she saw him, her eyes darted to the folder. "Work stuff?" she asked. He hesitated, not wanting to frighten her with talk of hidden dangers. "Something like that," he answered gently, stepping closer to hand her a small box of chocolates he had bought on the way back. "A little treat?" She beamed, accepting the box with a smile that made him feel lighter. "You're spoiling me," she teased. "I'll get used to it." He chuckled. "Then I guess I'll just have to keep it up." They passed the next hour in easy conversation, comparing favorite scenes from the latest adventure novel she was devouring. He marveled at how quickly they'd learned each other's rhythms, her polite hesitations, his occasional lapses into business speak. Yet their bond was growing, anchored by a blend of trust and necessity. Beneath that sweetness, however, an undercurrent of fear remained. Her next test results, the tabloid threat, and the question of who might still be looking for her in the aftermath of Evelyn's death. Eventually, Charlotte dozed off, lulled by the low hum of the TV and the weight of another day of treatments. Richard lingered, smoothing her blanket, ensuring she breathed comfortably. Then, brushing aside the ache in his chest, he made his way back to the small lounge where Marina's box of Evelyn's belongings remained. He hadn't read every word yet, but he felt compelled to glean more clues about the extent of her debts and any danger that might carry over. He opened one of the crumpled notebooks. It contained irregular journal entries in Evelyn's neat handwriting. Leafing through, he discovered chilling references, names of shadowy lenders, amounts far exceeding what a typical job would cover, and scribbles about being followed whenever she missed a payment. One passage caught his attention. They said, "If I don't pay by the end of the month, they'll take everything. I can't let them near Charlotte. I should leave town, but I'm running out of places to hide. Sometimes I want to call Richard, but I know how he is about his career. If he stepped in, it might ruin him, or they might see him as a bigger target. I can't do that to him." He shut the notebook and stared at the blank wall ahead, a storm of guilt and anger swirling inside him. If she had only reached out, yes, it might have risked involving him in some messy confrontation, but at least Charlotte wouldn't have suffered so long without proper care, and Evelyn might still be alive. His mind flicked to Graham's legal expertise. Perhaps they could track down these lenders, settle any claims, and close the door on that threat for good. He could pay whatever it cost. He was well versed in cutting deals when pressed to do so. Pushing back from the makeshift table, he gathered the papers and made a call to Graham. Even though it was late, he knew his attorney would answer. Quietly, he explained what he'd uncovered, the names scrawled in Evelyn's notes, the amounts. "Dig into these leads," he said, voice firm. "If someone out there thinks they still have a claim, I want it handled discreetly. I won't let them leverage Charlotte as a pawn." Graham, sounding both concerned and loyal, promised to start inquiries immediately. A weary relief settled over him once he ended the call. Each step felt like he was playing a high-stakes game of chess, where every move had repercussions he couldn't fully predict. But at least he was making them with Charlotte's safety in mind rather than corporate gain. Rising from his seat, he trudged back toward her room. He found her sleeping peacefully, the flicker of the television casting soft shadows over her features. He paused near the door, letting the quiet moment soothe the tension coiled in his muscles. No matter how complex the outside world became, in here, with Charlotte sleeping, he felt anchored to a gentler purpose. He dozed in the chair for a while, stirring only when dawn's first light peeked through the blinds. That morning, Dr. Ames entered looking more upbeat than usual. "I've got preliminary labs," she said, her voice hushed but hopeful. "It appears Charlotte's blood counts are holding steady. The new meds are helping." Richard almost sagged in relief, tears threatening to surface. "That's good," he managed, sounding oddly breathless. Dr. Ames nodded, a faint smile tugging her lips. It is. We'll keep monitoring. I'll run a few more tests over the coming days, but this might let us wait on more invasive options. If she continues to improve, we'll have the luxury of choosing the timing of any transplant rather than rushing. After she left, he sat with Charlotte, waiting for her to wake. When she finally blinked her eyes open, he shared the news, watching her break into a true, unguarded grin. "Really?" she asked, voice trembling with cautious excitement. "I'm not getting worse?" He squeezed her hand. "You're holding steady, maybe even a little better. Dr. Ames wants to see how far you can go with this round of treatment." The look of relief and joy on her face was enough to make him forget every business victory he'd ever celebrated. This was a triumph worth savoring. At that precise moment, though, his phone buzzed. The PR manager's number flashed on the screen. He stepped into the corridor to answer, bracing for unwelcome news. Sure enough, her voice was tense. "One of the tabloids is running a story today claiming you fathered a child out of wedlock who's gravely ill. They don't have Charlotte's name, but they're linking your visits to a hospital in Queens. There's speculation about hush money and secret medical payments." Richard's jaw tightened. "Threaten legal action if they print speculation as fact. Emphasize that no one can identify the child without consent. Keep them from harassing the hospital staff." The PR manager assured him she would do everything possible, but her tone suggested that controlling the narrative might prove difficult. If the paparazzi swarmed, Charlotte's anonymity would be at risk. Still gripping the phone, he looked in through the doorway at Charlotte, who now tried to sit up, curiosity dancing across her face as she realized he was discussing something serious. He offered her a small wave, a silent promise that he would shield her from that madness. Turning away, he concluded the call. "Do what you must," he told the PR manager before hanging up. As soon as he re-entered the room, Charlotte asked, "Is something wrong?" He couldn't bear to lie outright, so he settled for a gentle dodge. "Just people trying to guess why I've been so focused on the hospital. It's all rumors, but it's annoying." Her brows knit, but she nodded. "Will it make problems for you?" He sank onto the chair beside her. "It might," he admitted, "but that's my concern, not yours. And I'll handle it. You focus on getting stronger." A quiet fell over them. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "Dad?" The word jolted him, and he realized it was the first time she'd addressed him that way. His heart pounded. "Yes?" he managed, voice thick. She blushed, looking down at her blanket. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on me." Emotions surged within him. Gratitude, humility, an overwhelming need to protect this child who had finally called him by the word he never thought he'd hear. Carefully, he reached over and clasped her small hand in his. "I'll never give up on you," he said, steady and certain. "Not ever." Outside, the city roiled with rumors, and somewhere in the background lurked the faint specter of Evelyn's old debts. But in that moment, father and daughter sat together in the gentle hush of a hospital room, forging a bond stronger than any headlines. With his entire being, Richard vowed that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, threats, gossip, or medical setbacks, he would face them all. Because fatherhood, he now understood, was about far more than biology or even legal custody. It was about embracing a love fierce enough to weather every storm. Richard spent the following week juggling two fronts of a battle he'd never asked to fight. On one side, he faced Charlotte's medical needs, committing more time than ever to learning the intricacies of her treatment. He participated in the daily updates Dr. Ames provided, charting each lab result, every spike or dip in her vitals, and any small shift in her appetite or energy. On the other side lay the relentless approach of the media, eager to confirm rumors of a secret child. The PR team did its best to shield him, deflecting inquiries with standard lines about Lennox Holdings' commitment to children's health care, but it wasn't enough to stop the whispers. The tabloids printed tantalizing half-truths, speculating wildly about who the child might be. And while none had managed to expose Charlotte by name, the stress of constant scrutiny weighed on him like a suffocating fog. He'd grown used to his phone buzzing with texts from Sophia, Graham, or the PR manager at odd hours. One evening, just as the sky darkened to a pale violet, he stepped into the corridor for a moment of quiet. Charlotte was stable enough that she'd fallen into a light nap, and he intended to let her rest undisturbed. But his phone immediately lit up. When he saw Sophia's number, he felt the usual lurch of dread. "Sir," she said, voice tense, "2 reporters from some tabloid have been spotted lurking near the children's ward entrance. Security made them leave, but we suspect they'll try to sneak back. They keep asking about you and a girl here under your guardianship." He swallowed a spike of anger, visions of paparazzi attempting to snap photos or hound Charlotte for an interview. "Inform hospital security to tighten protocols. No one except authorized medical staff and visitors gets anywhere near her room. Also, ask Graham to prepare injunctions against those publications if they cross the line." Sophia's agreement was swift. He ended the call, shoulders tight with a coiled resentment. Charlotte didn't need to know any of this. She already bore enough burdens. Returning to her room, he found her awake, half-propped on her pillows, fiddling with a pen and a small notepad. She tilted her head curiously at him. "You look upset," she said softly. "Did something happen?" He tried to project calm. "Just work drama," he lied. She studied his face as though not entirely convinced, but she let it go. "Is it okay if I ask you something?" she ventured. He pulled a chair to her bedside. "Anything." She glanced down at her notepad. "If the hospital says I can leave soon, where would I go? Is it really okay for me to move in with you?" He reached over to rest a hand on her arm. "I'd be honored to have you. I know it's not the same as having your mom, but you'll have your own room. We'll make sure everything's as you want it, and we'll arrange home nursing. You won't be alone." A flicker of relief passed over her face, yet it mingled with caution. "You sure?" she pressed. "Won't it disrupt your life?" Something about her choice of words made his throat tighten. She sounded far too aware for someone her age. "My life was never really balanced in the first place," he admitted quietly, "but I'm working on changing that." He stayed with her until she drifted off again, then made a quick escape for a coffee run. In the hallway, he nearly bumped into Dr. Ames, who was scanning a patient chart. She greeted him with a concerned smile. "How are you holding up?" He shrugged, summoning a wan grin. "I've had easier weeks, but Charlotte seems better." The doctor nodded, her eyes brightening. "Her blood cell counts have improved, not drastically, but steadily. If that continues, we might delay a transplant indefinitely and focus on medication. She'll still need careful watching, but this is a good sign." Relief flared in him, fierce and sudden. "That's fantastic, thank you." Dr. Ames placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "You've done a lot for her, Mr. Lennox. I hope you see that too." Then she passed down the corridor, leaving him alone with the echo of her words. For a moment, he allowed himself a rare moment of pride. What he'd done was more than just pay bills. He'd stepped into a child's life and tried to be the father she never had. After picking up coffee, he sat in the nearly deserted family lounge. The memory of those letters from Evelyn still tugged at him, along with the knowledge that somewhere, perhaps a shadowy debt collector might yet be waiting. Graham had been investigating the names Evelyn had written in her journals, but so far little had turned up. Only a trail of defunct loan agencies and half-dissolved companies. The detective Graham hired reported that many of those operations were under new ownership, and they might not even be aware of Evelyn's debts. Yet Richard couldn't shake the feeling that they'd resurface just when Charlotte's life was beginning to stabilize. He sipped his coffee, staring into the swirling liquid, thinking of the timeline ahead. If her labs kept improving, she might be ready to leave the hospital in a matter of weeks. He'd need a nurse for 24-hour supervision, plus specialized equipment installed at home for monitoring. Sophia had already begun coordinating deliveries, quietly so as not to attract more media attention. He decided it might be wise to hire private security as well, just to keep any unwanted eyes off Charlotte. As soon as he mentally formed that plan, his phone vibrated again. Another call from Graham. He answered, bracing himself. "Any news?" he asked. Graham sighed. "We've had leads on 2 of the loan shark names. Both are tied to a larger network known for shady practices, money laundering, intimidation, the works. It seems they might still be active in some capacity. No direct mention of Evelyn's debt, but you know how these circles operate. If they realize she had a child, and that the child is connected to a wealthy individual, they might sense an opportunity." Richard's free hand curled into a fist. "I want you to keep digging. If they're out there, let's pay them off or settle, whatever it takes to ensure they leave us alone." Graham hesitated. "Money usually satisfies, but these people might push for more if they see you as an endless well of cash." Richard's jaw clenched. "I don't care. I won't let them near her. Understood?" A pause, then Graham agreed. They ended the call, and Richard stared at the phone, feeling the cold press of dread. Just as Charlotte was starting to glimpse a future, old ghosts threatened from the sidelines. He returned to Charlotte's room with a carefully blank expression, refusing to let her sense his turmoil. She was awake again, reading through a children's magazine. She brightened when she saw him, pointing excitedly to a page featuring pets up for adoption. "Is that a golden retriever?" she asked, eyes wide. "They look so friendly." He sank beside her bed, willing away the dark thoughts of extortion or danger. "They are. Loyal, too." She sighed with a wistful smile. "Maybe one day." He reached out, ruffling her hair gently. "One day soon, if your health holds up. We'll see about a dog, or whatever you want." A note of wonder filled her expression. "You make it sound so easy, like anything could happen." Softly, he replied, "I've learned that life's short, Charlotte. If you want something badly enough, we'll find a way." Days passed, with each sunrise bringing marginal improvements in her condition and a growing sense of anticipation, almost as if the hospital stay was nearing its final chapter. The medical staff felt optimistic, telling him that as soon as the next series of scans and lab tests confirmed her progress, they'd schedule her for discharge with outpatient follow-ups every few days. He threw himself into preparations, clearing a massive guest suite at his penthouse, decorating it in colors he hoped she'd like, stocking it with books and soft blankets. A friend with design expertise helped turn the previously sterile space into a cozy haven. Pastel walls, a corner reading nook, and a small mural of stars overhead. Each small touch felt like a gift he could finally offer. Meanwhile, the media circus edged closer. A handful of tabloids ran sensational headlines about a mystery girl, though none had pinned down Charlotte's identity. Paparazzi lurked outside Lennox Holdings, snapping photos of Richard entering and leaving. He avoided comment, refusing to dignify their speculation with a response. Within the hospital, security had stepped up measures, granting him some reprieve. The tension, however, remained like an electric hum in the air. One afternoon, he caught a glimpse of the hooded figure from before, Marina. She was ducking out of the stairwell, apparently checking on Charlotte from afar. He tried to catch her eye, but she seemed intent on slipping away. Perhaps she was wary of being seen too close to him, fearing more questions about her involvement. He had a fleeting urge to call after her, but decided against it, understanding she might prefer anonymity, now that her role in contacting him was complete. That evening, as the city lights blinked on, Charlotte looked up from her bed with a bright, eager expression. "Dr. Ames said there's a chance I can go home in 2 weeks." She grinned, then paused, glancing around her hospital room as if unsure how to say goodbye to a place that had both confined and protected her. "Home," she repeated softly, as if tasting the word. The sadness in her eyes revealed how rarely she'd felt truly at home anywhere. He pulled his chair closer, resting a hand on hers. "I know it's scary," he said gently, "but this is what we've been working for. You'll have doctors checking on you, but you'll also have your own space. And me, of course." Her eyes danced with excitement and a little fear. "You promise you won't get tired of me, or regret this?" His throat constricted, recalling how Evelyn had worried he'd see them as burdens. "I'll never regret you," he stated firmly. "I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I won't abandon you." She nodded, some hidden tension melting. For a long moment, neither spoke, simply sharing the quiet relief that came from envisioning a life outside the hospital's walls. That night, as Charlotte slept, he lingered at her side, phone gripped in his hand, in case Graham called with any updates about lurking threats. Instead, the message that arrived was from Sophia, a short note that their legal team had filed injunctions against tabloid intrusion. He exhaled, grateful for the temporary barrier. He just needed more time to get Charlotte safely into his home, time to watch her regain strength, and time to finalize whatever arrangement would keep any of Evelyn's old enemies at bay. Standing by the window, he watched the glow of traffic below. The future felt uncertain, a precarious balance of hope and danger. But for all the dread of scandal and unseen threats, he felt something deeper shaping his life, something more potent than any challenge. He recalled the moment Charlotte had softly addressed him as Dad. That single word underscored everything he was fighting for. He pressed a hand to the glass and let the city lights shimmer in his vision, imagining the day he'd guide Charlotte out of this ward for good. If fortune held, she'd soon awaken in a room decorated just for her, far above the noisy streets, free from the fear and pain that had defined so much of her young existence. Over the next few hours, he wrote out a list of everything needed for her transition home: medical supplies, a private nurse, educational materials, so she wouldn't fall behind in her learning. He resolved to navigate each obstacle, whether it was a bureaucratic tangle with insurance or a pushy journalist camped outside his building. It was a new kind of project plan, one with a heart at its center instead of profit margins. Strange how something he once viewed as impossible, caring for a child, now felt more vital than any deal he'd ever struck. At last, fatigue compelled him to settle into the chair, one eye on Charlotte's sleeping form, the other on his phone. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures chasing Evelyn, of Charlotte standing on the edge of a skyscraper, reaching for him. Yet every time he jolted awake, he saw her safe and breathing before him, and he found the will to drift back to that uneasy rest. In those dark hours, he realized how much he owed to a letter dropped off on his desk, an anonymous plea that had shattered his old life, only to replace it with the chance to build something far more meaningful. Richard woke to the familiar beep of hospital monitors, but this morning carried a fresh sense of hope. Dr. Ames had told him to expect final confirmation regarding Charlotte's release date, and he could contain his anticipation only with difficulty. He had balanced corporate demands and the swirling rumor mill while focusing on her path to recovery. Now, the possibility of taking his daughter home loomed, a milestone he once found unimaginable. The crisp autumn sunlight filtered through the window, illuminating Charlotte's face as she stirred in her bed. She looked stronger, her complexion warmer, and she flashed him a tentative grin. He returned it, heart swelling with pride. Today was the culmination of their collective effort: medical staff, finances, and the unbreakable bond forming between father and child. Shortly after breakfast, Dr. Ames arrived bearing good news. The latest scans showed no alarming changes, reinforcing the idea that Charlotte could be released within days. Though she still needed medication and careful monitoring, the hospital environment no longer seemed mandatory. Richard felt an almost childlike glee at the thought of walking her out of this place, away from the sterile corridors and prying eyes. He had already transformed a guest room in his penthouse, filling it with soft blues and pastel yellows Charlotte seemed to favor. A private nurse stood ready, and specialized equipment would be delivered that afternoon. Dr. Ames gave him a fresh list of prescriptions, plus instructions on scheduling regular checkups. He thanked her. He realized how deeply she had fought for Charlotte. That afternoon he noticed Charlotte paging through a children's magazine, pausing at pictures of dogs available for adoption. Her eyes gleamed whenever she found a friendly face. The sight reminded him of her tentative dream, voiced in a previous conversation, the hope of sharing space with a pet one day. Before, he might have dismissed the idea as too complicated. Now he felt only a surge of determination. When he knelt by her bed, she held up the page, face alight with excitement. "Someday," she said softly, as if daring to believe in a life beyond medical appointments. He brushed a stray hair from her forehead and answered with quiet conviction, "We'll make that someday happen soon." News of Charlotte's impending release spread quickly among the nurses, who had grown fond of her gentle spirit. They stopped by one after another, offering small gifts, a handmade bracelet, a puzzle book, drawings of cartoon animals. Witnessing the outpouring of compassion, Richard felt humbled. These were the same men and women who fought tirelessly for children like Charlotte each day, often without recognition. Now they cheered as if she were their own family member about to leave the nest. Charlotte accepted each token shyly, blinking back tears when one nurse gave her a soft plush cat. She clutched it like a talisman of better days to come. Meanwhile, the swirling rumors outside the hospital walls intensified. Sophia sent frequent updates, relaying the tabloids' wild guesses. Some speculated that Richard was covering up a scandal. Others claimed he'd adopted a random child for a PR boost. A few rogue paparazzi even tried bribing hospital staff for details, though strict security measures thwarted most attempts. Each report made Richard's anger simmer, but he kept it contained, channeling that energy into protecting Charlotte. One afternoon, he caught her staring out the window, lips pressed together in silent worry. He asked if something was wrong, and she hesitated before admitting, "I hear whispers in the hall about you and me. I hope I'm not causing trouble." He knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. "You're no trouble. People talk, but I'm not letting them hurt you. Ever." With her release day imminent, the hospital staff arranged a final round of tests. When Charlotte emerged from the imaging room, looking drained but resolute, Richard stood waiting, heart pounding. Dr. Ames promised results by evening. Until then, father and daughter settled into a patient vigil. They flipped through her favorite adventure book, watched a silly cartoon on the small TV, and shared a subdued meal that felt like a quiet celebration. As dusk fell, the overhead lights cast gentle shadows across Charlotte's bed, and Richard thought of all the nights he'd slumped on a stiff chair, listening to the beep of machines. Soon those nights in the hospital would end, and a new reality would begin. Late that evening, Dr. Ames approached with the results. Her smile gave away the verdict before she spoke a word. "Her levels remain stable," she confirmed. "No immediate sign of regression. We'll do checkups twice weekly, but I see no reason to keep her here." The breath Richard had been holding escaped in a rush of relief. Charlotte broke into an ecstatic grin, her eyes shining with tears. Hours later, with discharge paperwork signed and prescriptions filled, she finally changed out of the drab hospital gown into comfortable clothes. Nurses and volunteers gathered to bid her farewell, forming a corridor of well-wishers. Richard felt his chest tighten at their kindness. They stepped outside into a crisp morning. For a moment, Charlotte squinted against the natural light, looking stunned by the open air. Then she inhaled deeply, as if tasting freedom. Richard led her to the waiting car, gently helping her settle in. When he slid into the seat beside her, she released a shaky laugh. "I almost can't believe I'm out," she whispered, hugging the plush cat on her lap. He smiled, voice thick with emotion. "We're starting fresh. This is your life now, and I'll make sure it's safe." The drive to his penthouse felt both exhilarating and surreal. She gazed wide-eyed at the skyline, mouth slightly open whenever they passed notable landmarks. He remembered how she'd once mentioned never seeing the city from above. When they arrived, the doorman ushered them upstairs with discreet efficiency, avoiding the reporters milling around the block. In the elevator, Charlotte pressed close to Richard, her nerves returning. "Is it really okay for me to live here?" she asked, her voice trembling. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "More than okay. This place is big and lonely without you." When the elevator doors slid open, she stepped into the vast penthouse, eyes darting from the gleaming floors to the panoramic windows. The hush felt electric. Richard led her to the room he'd prepared, pastel walls, fluffy rugs, a cozy reading nook, and an array of books he'd handpicked. Charlotte's gasp was soft but full of wonder. She set her plush cat on the bed and ran a hand over the comforter. "It's mine?" she asked, voice quivering. "All yours," he replied, standing in the doorway. "Decorate it however you want. If there's something missing, we'll get it." She spun around, tears of gratitude glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He crossed the room, pulling her into a gentle hug, one she returned with tentative strength. In that moment, the last vestiges of fear and uncertainty seemed to recede, replaced by a warmth that felt like a promise of home. Outside, the city bustled with a million distractions, but here, father and daughter shared a hard-won peace. Over the next days, the private nurse arrived, ensuring medications were on schedule and Charlotte's vitals remained stable. She ventured through the penthouse in awe, remarking on the view from the living room windows, rows of glinting skyscrapers by day, a sea of twinkling lights by night. Richard, meanwhile, juggled work calls and a swirl of ongoing legal efforts to quell the tabloids. Graham's investigator found no immediate threats from Evelyn's old debts, though they remained watchful. Sometimes, lingering on the couch with Charlotte at his side, he considered how precarious life could be. Yet each day she laughed a little more freely, drifting away from the hush of hospital corridors. One morning, she mustered the courage to ask, "Do you think Mom would be happy to see this?" Her question landed softly, but it carried a world of longing. Richard set aside his tablet and turned to face her. "I do," he said, heart twisting. "She did everything she could to protect you. Now, it's my turn." Charlotte nodded, gaze drifting to the cityscape. "I wish she'd been here with us." He touched her hand gently, understanding the sorrow beneath her words. "Me too," he whispered. That afternoon, she curled up in her new reading nook, flipping through a dog training guide Richard had spontaneously ordered. She giggled at pictures of playful puppies, inviting him to sit and dream aloud about which breed they might get someday. He realized that for the first time, their talk of the future felt tangible. They spoke of the next school year, upcoming holidays, and the small traditions they might invent just for themselves. Movie nights, pancake breakfasts, walks in the park once she was stronger. Each idea shimmered with the possibility of a normal life they both craved. By the week's end, Charlotte's routine encompassed short, careful walks around the penthouse to build stamina. Occasionally, she grew winded or needed to rest, and the nurse monitored her closely. But Dr. Ames reported steady improvement, praising Richard's dedication to her medication schedule and stress-free environment. In fleeting moments of reflection, he thought back to those early days in the hospital, how uncertain everything had felt. Now, though challenges remained, they had forged something steady between them, a bond tempered by adversity. Late one evening, he found Charlotte standing at the massive window, gazing at the lit skyline. She turned, hearing his soft steps, and beckoned him to join her. "It's like 1,000 stars, just like you said," she breathed, pressing her palm against the glass. He slipped an arm around her shoulder, matching her quiet wonder. "You made it here," he said, voice laced with awe. No more hospital bed, no more drifting from place to place. She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. "We made it," she corrected, and he felt that small admission resonate deep within him. Tomorrow, the rumor mill might flare again, or a stray lead from Evelyn's debts might surface. Yet in that moment, father and daughter stood side by side, hearts full of gratitude for a tomorrow that finally felt reachable. He realized how far they had come, from an anonymous letter on his desk to a shared future so unexpectedly precious. Gently, he tightened his hold on Charlotte, feeling her breathing steady against him, and allowed a rare sense of peace to settle in. Whatever came next, whatever storms threatened, they would face them together.